Timothy McVeigh was born in Lockport, New York, the only son and the second of three children of William and Mildred McVeigh. His parents divorced when he was only 10 years old, and he was raised by his father in Pendleton, New York. McVeigh claimed to have been the target of bullying at school, and he took refuge in a fantasy world where he imagined retaliating against the bullies. At the end of his life, he stated his belief that the United States government is the ultimate bully. Most who knew McVeigh remember as being very withdrawn and shy, with a few describing him as outgoing and a playful child who withdrew as an adolescent. McVeigh is said to have only one girlfriend during his childhood, later stating to journalists he did not know how to impress girls. According to his authorized biography, his only sustaining relief from his unsatisfied sex drive was his even stronger desire to die. McVeigh was introduced to firearms by his grandfather. He told people he wanted to be a gun shop owner and sometimes took firearms to school to impress his classmates. McVeigh became intensely interested in gun rights after he graduated from high school, as well as the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. In May 1988, at age 20, McVeigh graduated from the U.S. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia. While in the military, McVeigh used much of his spare time to read about firearms, sniper tactics, and explosives. McVeigh was reprimanded by the military for purchasing a white powder t-shirt at a KKK protest against black servicemen who wore what he viewed as a black powder t-shirt around the Army base. McVeigh was awarded a Bronze Star for his service in the First Gulf War. He was a top-scoring gunner with a 25mm cannon of the Bradley fighting vehicles used by the 1st Infantry Division to which he was assigned. He was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas, before being deployed on an Operation Desert Storm with the division. At Fort Riley, McVeigh completed his primary leadership development course. After leaving the Army in 1992, McVeigh grew increasingly transient. At first he worked briefly near his town of Pendleton as a security guard, where he sounded off daily to his co-worker Carl LeBron Jr. about his loathing for the government. Deciding the Buffalo area was too liberal, he left his job and began driving around America, seeking out his old friends from the Army. In 1993, he drove to Waco, Texas during the Waco siege to show his support. At the scene, he distributed pro-gun rights literature and bumper stickers, such as "When guns are outlawed, I will become an outlaw." For the 5 months following the Waco siege, McVeigh worked at gun shows and handed out free cards printed up with Lon Horichi's name and address in hope that somebody in the Patriot movement would assassinate the sharpshooter. Horichi is an FBI sniper, and some of his official actions have drawn controversy, specifically his shooting and killing of Randy Weaver's wife while she held an infant child. He wrote hate mail to the sniper, suggesting that what goes around comes around, and he later considered putting aside his plan to target the Mura building to target Horichi or a member of his family instead. The Oklahoma City bombing was a domestic terrorist bomb attack on the Alfred P. Mura Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City on April 19, 1995. It remained the most destructive act of terrorism committed in the United States until the September 11 attacks of 2001. The bombing killed 168 people and injured more than 680 others. Within 90 minutes of the explosion, Timothy McVeigh was stopped by the Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger for driving without a license plate and arrested for unlawfully carrying a weapon. Forensic evidence quickly lined McVeigh and Terry Nichols to the attack. Nichols was arrested, and within days both were charged. Michael and Lori Fortier were later identified as accomplices. McVeigh had detonated an explosive-filled Ryder rental truck parked in front of the building. McVeigh's co-conspirator, Terry Nichols, had assisted in the bomb preparation. Motivated by his hatred of the federal government and angered by what he perceived as mishandling of the 1993 Waco siege and the Ruby Ridge incident in 1992, McVeigh had timed his attack to coincide with the second anniversary of the deadly fire that ended the siege at Waco. The chief conspirators, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, met in 1988 at Fort Benning during the basic training for the U.S. Army. Michael Fortier, McVeigh's accomplice, was his Army roommate. The three shared interests in survivalism. They expressed anger at the federal government's handling of the 1992 FBI standoff with Randy Weaver at Ruby Ridge as well as the Waco siege, a 1993 51-day standoff between the FBI and Branch Davidian members which began with a botched ATF attempt to execute a search warrant leading to a firefight. It is unknown whether the ATF agents or Branch Davidians fired the first shot, and ended with the burning and shooting deaths of David Koresh and 75 others. In March 1993, McVeigh visited the Waco site during the standoff and then again after its conclusion. McVeigh later decided to bomb a federal building as a response to the raids. McVeigh initially intended only to destroy a federal building, but he later decided that his message would be better received if many people were killed in the bombing. McVeigh's criterion for potential attack sites was the target should at least have two of the three federal law enforcement agencies, the ATF, the FBI, and the DEA. He regarded the presence of additional law enforcement agencies, such as the Secret Service or the U.S. Marshal Service, as a bonus. The following is a letter which shows the buildup of anger that McVeigh had against the U.S. federal government, against its citizens, and the politics that led to his bombing of the federal building on April 19, 1995, the second anniversary of Waco. McVeigh wrote, "I explain herein why I bombed the Mira Federal Building in Oklahoma City. I explain this is not for publicity, nor seeking to win an argument of right or wrong. I explain so that the record is clear as to my thinking and motivations in bombing a government installation. I choose to bomb a federal building because such an action served more purposes than other options. Foremost, the bombing was a retaliatory strike, a counterattack for the cumulative raids that federal agents had participated in over the preceding years, including, but not limited to, Waco, from the formation of such units as the FBI's hostage rescue and other assault teams amongst federal agencies during the 80s, culminating in the Waco incident. Federal actions grew increasingly militaristic and violent to the point where Waco, our government, like the Chinese, was deploying tanks against its own citizens. From this perspective, what occurred in Oklahoma City was no different than what Americans rain on the heads of others all the time, and subsequently, the mindset was one of clinical detachment. The bombing of the Mira building was not personal, no more than when the Air Force, Army, Navy, or Marine personnel bomb or launch cruise missiles against government installations and their personnel. Even many who agreed with some of McVeigh's politics viewed his act as counterproductive, with much of the criticism focused on the deaths of innocent children. Critics expressed chagrin that McVeigh had not assassinated specific government leaders. McVeigh indeed contemplated the assassinations of Attorney General Janet Reno, Lon Horici, and others in preference to attacks on the building, and after the bombing he said that he sometimes wished he carried out a series of assassinations instead. In wake of the bombing, the national media seized upon the fact that 19 of the victims had been babies and children, many in daycare centers. At the time of the bombing, there were 100 daycare centers in the United States and 7,900 federal buildings. McVeigh later stated he was unaware of the daycare center when choosing the building as a target, and if he had known, it might have given him pause to switch targets. That's a large amount of collateral damage. The FBI stated that McVeigh scouted the interior of the building in December 1994 and likely knew of the daycare center before the bombing. In April 2010, Joseph Hartzler, the prosecutor at McVeigh's trial, questioned how he could have decided to pass over a prior target building because of an included florist shop, but at the Mira building not notice that there's a children's daycare center there, and there was a credit union there and a social security office. Greek philosopher Plato and many other natural law theorists embraced the idea that human law should strive to reflect certain universal and external truths or virtues. Therefore, the ultimate purpose of the law for Plato, and for virtually all natural law theorists, is a moral one. Its role is to act as a guide for society, a means of measuring justice and of reforming evil practices. Hence, we see in Plato's philosophy the idea of that natural law, or as he called it, natural justice, contains enduring moral values by which one may assess the laws of the state. The theory of positive law is derived from the belief that law is simply what the political authority or lawmaker commands. Justice then means conformity to the law. Instead of the law and justice being separate, as the naturalists propose, supporters of positive law argue that they are identical. Therefore, the condition that human laws must conform to certain standards of morality and justice in order to be valid is abandoned. The only real morality is in human obedience to the civil law. Based on these two theories, I personally believe Timothy McVeigh's actions were unjust. It is extremely unmoral to kill people to prove a point, let alone innocent women and children. This unjust action did not strive to create the greatest possible happiness for the most amount of people, but instead created a lot of distress for a lot of people.